Leeds, Leeds, Leeds. What is happening? Welcome to Working Hours, an oral history podcast about a place called Leeds, a time called now, and an activity called work. Working Hours wants to record 1,000 learners over the course of this, the most important decade in the history of the human species, and ask them about what they do all day and hear how they feel about it. My name is Simon, and this is all my fault. My mission here is to try to map out what my city, Leeds, a city that has declared a climate emergency, did during humanity's biggest emergency. On Working Hours, we hear how lawyers have, are, and will be coping with our multiple and expanding crises during their day-to-day working hours. Can we turn things around? We'll find out. To tell this story, I need lawyers like you, dear listener. I need people in Leeds or people from Leeds to come on this podcast and just tell me what they do all day and let me record how this affects us. Thank you for listening. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Okay, so I've got three things that were like my burning passions when I was a kid. So it wasn't like any one thing. I used to have lots of fleeting ideas of things I wanted to do, but at my core, what I really, really wanted to do was be a fashion designer. That was my first really strong passion. And my second was a writer, and my third was an actor. And so what I tried to do was all of those three things, all at the same time, because I have ADHD. So if anybody's out there with ADHD, they know you can't just have like one thing, and you have lots of like hyperfixations on things and like, special interests. So just about, but what I was actually very good at, which I've used a lot, which is very different, which I didn't identify as a skill, is I was really good at like business type things. So we had, I remember distinctly, came into school, of all places, British Gas, and they did like a workshop. We all had to get into groups, and we all had to get together, and we had to think in a group about how to develop like a sort of business idea. And our group won like a little award, and it went into like a regional thing, and it was like really interesting when I look back. And so I was always into really creative ventures, but then had this sort of really good, creating really good sort of ideas as such, like business type ideas. And even to the point where at home, I would actually sit down and write out like business ideas. Like I was always going, oh, I'm going to send this letter off to Richard Branson and see what he thinks of my latest venture. You know what I mean? And so I was always like looking at businesses thinking, oh, like, oh, that shop could be better. What could I do? And I still do it now. I walk around the shop and think, oh, their window display is absolutely, I could really change that. Look at like what it looks like outside. That the footfall could be so improved. Just change that window display. So I'm really curious. Like I've actually used those skills more in my working career. Those ones that I just naturally had, those natural abilities. I call them natural abilities. Them sort of like problem solving and like creativity than I have anything else. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about those three passions I had, which is, so when I wanted to be a fashion designer, I went to the art college in Leeds. It was then called Jacob Kramer. And I got taken by my parents to the art college, and I watched some wannabe fashion designers drawing up different outfits and things like that and doing the sketches. But my passion was drawing shoes. I am still obsessed with shoes. And I would go rummaging around car boots on a Sunday and buy the ugliest shoes that you could possibly find, and then take them home and basically pimp them up to look really pretty and, put glue on and paint on and everything, and then go to school in them and obviously get royally told off. And I was never in my school outfit. I would have to do something to it, and I would just get in trouble for this. So that was what I was like. And then I was always the kid at the back of the class that wasn't doing what the teacher was telling me, but was instead writing some poetry in the back of my book or doing some doodles or something like that. But the only thing I was like particularly good at, if we can say, at school was writing and acting. And I used to love doing drama. And when it got to GCSE topics, the drama teacher said, "Oh, you're brilliant. You're going to get like an A." And it was the only thing I was going to get an A in. And I was like so excited. And then it got to final year of choices because by contrast, languages were my worst. My French teacher was like, "Don't even bother coming to class anymore." It was like that bad. Like, just don't even bother. Um, so we got to like the options and they said, "Oh, nobody else in this school really is any good or wants to do drama.
Mm.
So sorry, we're just getting rid of that GCSE." And to this day, I'm still heartbroken about that because I do think that would have changed my trajectory somewhat.
Mm.
And I started acting when I was about 12 in the local Amdram. So I was like really invested by this point. But the local school to the next neighbouring high school, and it still is, was an arts-based school who's had some very well-known actors come out of it.
Mm.
And I'd begged to go to that school, but my parents wouldn't let me. They were like, as most parents are, "Well, where's acting going to get you? Can't make any money from that." So, there is some truth in that if you don't, achieve success, I guess, in that area.
There is,
The-
but there's also a lot more opportunities in that area now because, like, it's not just theatre and film and TV. You've got corporate videos and, like, role-playing performances. Like, actors get into way more places now in terms of
that's
work.
that's the thing, isn't it? It's like acting is not what they perceive as acting. So
Mm.
I had quite a unique childhood in that where I lived, the actual village where I lived was the set for the soap Emmerdale.
Mm.
So I actually basically lived on a TV set,
Mm.
essentially. They were filming every day. I was undoubtedly an extra at some point, like as just a little person walking past on the street because it was just inevitable. I knew all the actors at that point in time that were acting on the show. So it felt like a natural progression. I was
Yeah.
doing my little bit on stage. I was performing on stage doing Amdram. I was seeing it around me. But their version of it, my parents was, "Oh, it's television."
Mm.
And only famous people get on TV. Like you say, they didn't think of the broader applications, which I now know about.
Mm.
And so I am still like bitterly disappointed really about that drama didn't go ahead. And what I ended up doing instead was I still found something creative. I did media studies because they kept that. And I did photography and I
Mm.
learned how to develop photographs in a blackout room and things like that. And it was really quite exciting. So I still did creative things, but never did anything creative after school, just went straight into studying, interesting enough, the sort of like sports studies and tourism.
Mm.
And that's what I just went on a really random tangent because I think I was so upset about the whole acting thing. I said, "Okay, well, I'll be an air steward then and travel the world, blow everything." Um, but never did it, never did it, never did it all. Never actually moved out of Leeds, just got a regular job working in a hotel, which was really interesting actually. I used to love it. I used to love meeting people, that's my thing, and
Mm.
chatting with people. I loved it. And then went into sales and then jobs and jobs and jobs and jobs. Then after a couple of years, I decided maybe I could be somebody who could study. Nobody's ever mentioned studying beyond school
Mm.
to me. Maybe I could, maybe I could do this thing that people call university.
Mm.
How about I give that a go? And wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but
Mm.
I thought, oh, well, I kind of liked being at school. Maybe I could be like a teacher, and I like English. So I thought, okay, I'll go train to be an English teacher. Applied for the course, and then they said, "Oh, there's a problem with this course. Can you come back in like a few months? We're doing like these interviews." I said, okay. So went on the interviews and actually got offered quite a few places to do English studies.
Mhm.
And then something happened, but I can't quite put my finger on what happened. There was a delay between me getting the offer and the start of the semester in September.
Mm.
And I just had a change of heart.
Mm.
And there's a process you can go through, which some people know about, called clearing, where you can check what other courses are available if you
Mhm.
want to change at the last minute. And I just started having a little look. And then I saw this course and it was unique at its time. It still is now, actually. And it's quite a rare course and it's something called an interdisciplinary course where you're not studying one thing, you're studying
Mm.
3 in 1. And it was like child psychology. It's now called childhood and education. It had a slightly different title when I did it. It was basically education, child psychology, and a few other little bits of things thrown in like sociology and all sorts really.
Mm.
And they just named it childhood studies. And I thought, oh, that sounds quite interesting. That'll keep me interested as somebody with ADHD and has a bit variety there. Why don't I just apply for that? So sent off my application, still had opportunities to go study English if that failed.
Mm.
And they said, oh yeah, pop in for an interview. Went and had my interview, sat an entrance exam. Next thing you know, 2 weeks later, I'm on that course.
When did you get the diagnosis for ADHD? Was that in later life or was that when you were younger?
Pending.
Pending.
I'm self-diagnosed at the moment.
Yeah.
It may happen next week, in fact, because I'm going for private diagnosis. In Leeds, we're quite a waiting list, as a lot of adults will know, about 4 or 5 years now. So it's been about 2 years I've been waiting, and there's a new form of testing that some people might be aware of where uh, I can't think of the name of the test because I'm just here on the spot now and I hadn't thought about mentioning my
That's all
ADHD.
right.
But there is a test that I went to with the ADHD Foundation. It's a new little test that they are using for children and young people at the minute, but I think they'll probably push it through to adults in the future,
Mm.
which is really interesting actually, which is a computerized test where they can record your movements and find out if you, compared to the general populace, if you're more hyperactive and inattentive, which is really cool, isn't it? I think. And it's a really short computerized test. So that's like your sort of precursor to say if you have ADHD. So I did that test
Mhm.
and it said, oh, yes, we think you have ADHD quite clearly. Basically, it's really funny actually, because they send you this big, really long report and there's like a graph. And it's
Mm.
like, there's the bottom of the graph where neurotypicals are. And then there's like this
Mm.
big graph up there where I am. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. That explains a few things.
Yeah.
So that when I'm saying all this, it's more me looking back thinking, oh, that makes sense why I had so many varied interests when I was younger and was kind of a bit all over the place because, so now I'm glad you asked that question because now I'm in the phase where I'm embracing my ADHD and using that,
Yeah. Well, it is a weird one because you kind of like with neurodivergence, you sort of like, well, isn't everybody? I'm just like this, but everybody's like how everybody is, and I'm just like how I am, and the differences are just me. And then you look at the sort of character traits of things that you've. It's like I've got this, I'm like this, and I'm this way, and then you go through questions like that, and it's like, oh, hang on. Yeah, no, I do that a lot. Oh, right. Okay. So that's because of this. And he goes, so that's a thing. It's not just me being me or me being different from everybody else. It's like I am different, but I'm also similar to a whole group of other people as well.
Well, this is why it's called neurodiversity. So neurodiversity means like it's similar to what you're saying that everybody, that's the umbrella for everyone. So everybody is neurodiverse
Mm.
and it's just in what ways. But neurodivergent means you have a clinically diagnosed form of neurodivergence that makes you different from most of the general population. So it's still only a small minority of people that will have a diagnosed neurodevelopmental condition like ADHD, like autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia. Even mental health is covered under neurodivergency because that obviously, so anything essentially in simplest term that affects your brain and how your brain thinks and acts in the world. But we are all neurodiverse, aren't we? Like you say, because all our brains are ultimately different. We've all got different neural pathways, we all think and feel in different ways. So we will all show some traits of neurodivergent, if you see what I mean. So
Mm.
some people might be a little bit more hyperactive, let's say, or a little bit more inattentive than another person, but they're not on the scale where they are reaching a diagnosis. That might be just their personality type. So you've got that lovely combination of is it personality or is it they're neurodivergent? But to answer also your question, even though this is new and pending my ADHD, it was actually at university that I found out I was neurodivergent. So when I went to study this course, I was about a year into the course, and we had a professor in special needs, and they were talking about neurodiversity, but they didn't use that term then. It's
Mhm.
still quite a new term. And they referred to it, unfortunately, as like old school, like special needs,
Mm.
which I'm less keen on that term, to be honest.
Well,
Um,
they changed it to sort of special learning needs then, hadn't they? They put an extra word in.
Yeah, and now we would call it like either like a learning difference or a specific learning disability,
Mm.
and so our language is changing all the time on
Mm.
these things. But neurodiversity kind of is a really good catch-all, but doesn't maybe tell you what the the neurodivergent is.
Mm.
But it's a nice way to sort of identify you're either neurotypical, which means you've got like the average brain set, or you're neurodivergent, but we're all neurodiverse, as in we accept that we all behave and act differently. So at university, what happened is I was chatting to this professor, and they kept sending me essays back, and they said, "Oh, you're just really lazy. You don't proofread. Like, look at the state of your essays." And I was like, and they're like, "We don't understand. Like, the quality, the content's great, but like, why can't you string a paragraph together? Like, why is your grammar so bad? Like, where's your punctuation? Like, we thought you did well in English. Like, what is going on?"
Mm.
And I was like, well, hang on a minute. Didn't you tell me about this thing that children have called dyslexia?
Mm.
You know, could that be it? You know? So they were like, what? You could have dyslexia, but like how? And I was like, well, you're the ones that are teaching me this, It was like such a surreal experience. So I went to their disability centre and said, hey, can you get hold of a psychologist and have me assessed?
Mm.
And they were like, well, yeah, but they weren't convinced, they were just kind of okay. And I said, well, what's the holdup? And they said, oh, it's like £500, which this is like 20 years ago. That's a lot of
Mm.
money, you
Mm.
know? And I was like, okay. I said, well, I'll pay it out my student loan. Just do this test. Yeah, I had to pay myself. I was like,
Was
I
there
want
no
this test.
mechanism in the college to pay for it, or were you working at the time?
No,
Oh,
I
okay.
received no support. It's like I have had literally throughout my working career and my academic career, no support around being neurodivergent. It's been very poor experience throughout.
Yeah.
And I hope that changes for a lot of people. And I know people are having better experiences now. And I know things are a little bit better, but I still know lots of people who struggle. And lots of people have come to me on my Instagram. And I'm glad for that. And that's why I'm here. And that's
Mm.
why I like to raise this awareness to say things are still not great out there, Noah, and it's not ideal, really.
Mm.
And so I did pay that money, got the psychology report, again, another big report, like
Mm.
millions of pages long. Really random little tests, if you've ever had a dyslexia,
Mhm.
really random. Little puzzles and little asking you to like recite words backwards and asking you dates of battles in the UK. So really kind of strange test. Um, and then they said to me, yeah, you're dyslexic and this is how your dyslexia affects you personally, you know. And it's not all about spelling and punctuation and grammar. Mine was organizing and getting things together and organizing
Mm.
thoughts and ideas on paper,
Mm.
and also hearing what people said and processing what they were saying. It was how my brain worked essentially. So I was like, oh, why so interesting? And so that's what really got me to where I am today, because I started thinking, I am so curious how the human brain works and people work and all these tests you can do and these things you can find out about how we
Mm.
operate. And then you'll notice today I'm wearing blue glasses. And that's because just before I went to university, they must have had a clue at college thinking, maybe this young person is neurodivergent. They said to me, you seem to be struggling to like read on the computer. And computers were only just becoming a thing. Like we used to handwrite at college, our essays.
Mm.
So we were suddenly transferring to like computer based technology. And these really, you can imagine old school screens and no filters or
Mm.
different fonts or anything.
Mm.
And they could see I wasn't quite typing in the boxes in the right place and things. They said to me, do you wear glasses? I'm like, yeah, I've only got a minor prescription, got really good eyesight, to be honest. And they said,
Mm.
oh, why don't you try these little coloured piece of paper and put them over your books and see if that helps, And I said, okay. I tried that, and they give me these pink bits of paper.
Mhm.
It never occurred to me that what was happening at that point is I had this condition called Erling syndrome, which is also a neurodivergent condition where your brain doesn't process light correctly. So what that means is you can't then read, if there's light shining onto paper, you can't read the text. You
Mm.
can't read it on a computer screen very well. And it never occurred to me then you could then take those coloured bits of paper and make them into coloured lenses, which is what
Mhm.
scientists had done, and then wear glasses so that then you could read and see properly.
Mhm.
So all these things have nicely dovetailed together, haven't they, into my adult life? But there were things that were, a lot of it was just time and it was just new. A
Yeah.
child born now would actually be able to go to the NHS and get these glasses, and a teacher might notice quicker, and a professor, you would hope, would notice quicker, and, things like that. It's just of its time, just of its
Yeah.
time.
Unfortunately, it'd be more like it'd be picked up ideally quicker. But being helped with may take a bit longer due to backlog.
Yeah, I'll get picked up when you're 8 and come back to us when you're 38.
And
It's pretty much the same difference, isn't
we'll
it?
test you when you've done all your exams and everything, and that's set out your
Usually
life
that's the
path for
way.
you. Yeah.
I mean, we're joking, but actually that is the way, isn't it? By the
Mm.
time, even now they're saying, that well, even now I'm knowing that there's young adults coming out of school, who have not got a dyslexia diagnosis, and they won't,
Mm. Mm.
because it's not a priority for schools, because I know it's still not funded. So the condition dyslexia and Erling's are very much my passion, because they're the two conditions that are not funded in the UK.
Mm.
Schools are not given cash to fund dyslexia for every pupil, because I think every pupil should be
Mm.
screened.
Yeah.
And the same with Erling's. And you know what? I'm not exaggerating when I say this. When I go out in public by simply wearing my glasses, I have parents approach me. It happens like every time I'm out, asking me questions, tell me about the children. I had a wonderful interaction with a woman last year where she said her child was really struggling in school, couldn't see the screen. They were starting to get distracted and attentive. So again, parents now are thinking, well, do they have ADHD?
Mm.
They're questioning other things. And then they said, tell me more about your glasses. And I said, well, do you know? And she said, yes, I've been looking into it, where to go and get a colour optional test and have them screened. I said, go for it. And then
Mm.
saw them a few weeks later, life changing.
Mm.
The child had got glasses, calming down in class, been able to function much better.
Well, that's it. It's the sort of thing of like, if you just screened everybody, then you would know, sort of thing. But also, it is beneficial to the school, because if they're all about test results and so on, if you can deal with that and put things in place for the kids, support them, and like you say, behavior will get better because they know why they're not sort of keeping up, or why they're having difficulty, or that they are having difficulty. So yeah, it just makes a whole lot of sense.
I'm not sure if it is a case of, because I've always said what you thought. I've always thought, to me, this is a madness that we're in a situation where there's a solvable problem. I
Mm.
said earlier when I was a kid, I like to get a problem and solve it. So to me, there's a solvable problem. You assess for dyslexia. So I'm not sure if the wider issue is, we just like with any situation, you think about, if you go to hospital today, there's not enough doctors or nurses.
Mm.
Is it just a resource issue? Do we just not have enough people who are assessors?
Mm.
Do we just not have enough doctors and nurses to assess neurodivergent conditions? I think that is probably the case. So it's a chicken and egg situation. It's like, yes, we'd like more assessment, but actually, do we have the people to do it? And do people want to do it? It's a long traineeship to learn how to become a psychologist and assess people for things.
Mhm.
So I think we can't address one without the other, can we? I mean, it's one of those things, if people don't want to do that as a job, if that's not their bag, we can't make them. So it is, I always think, on the one hand, oh, what you've just said, oh, it's so solvable.
Mm.
You could just assess everyone. And then I think, well, I know, for example, in West Yorkshire, there's a handful of assessors. So if they had to assess every school, every child, it would probably take 25 years.
You're listening to Series 5, Episode 31, and to my guest, Noah Roberts. This is another Zoom interview recorded on the 8th of February 2024. Hello, listener. Noah Roberts is a non-binary, neuro-queer, disabled raconteur who uses creativity to reduce ableism. They speak publicly and write about LGBT plus issues, mental health, disability, and neurodiversity. They offer freelance consultancy to creative projects and organizations on how to make their practices more accessible and how to engage a more diverse audience. They express their own creativity through performance art. Noah is also a community news reporter and a podcast host. They are foodie-loving, plant-based, and write a blog reviewing places to eat and drink, which is called Spilltheequalitea. Right, let's do this. Episode 141 of Working Hours with Noah Roberts. What is it you do now then?
Okay, so now it's completely left field because I don't do any of the things that we've just been talking about. To some extent, I am currently a queer, disabled activist, writer, and performer. So I don't know what you will all think, listeners, hearing that. I don't know if you'll be thinking, oh, yeah, that kind of makes sense from everything you've just said. Or you'll be thinking, because to me, it feels a bit like, what? Wait a minute. How did that go to that? I don't know. But yeah.
So do we want to go into how you got into it, or do you want to tell us a little bit more about what that actually means in practice? So it's sort of like, what's your day to day? Is it just conceiving pieces of performance art, or like, what are you doing on a kind of, how's your week look, for example?
That's a good question. Okay. So, I am going to go into this more when you ask me, like how I get into it and things, but essentially it looks like the activism is a little bit about what I've said. People contacting me out and about. So just my presence online and in person is a form of activism because I'm open to people asking questions about my being queer, my being neurodivergent, my being disabled, what that means. Um, Not at all times, not 24/7, 7 days a week, but that in itself is quite a big thing because there's quite a lot of people within the trans or LGBT community who may not want to have that forward facing. They may not want to be on social media. They may not want to be approached. There may not be people who want to write about it and talk about it, perform about it. So the writing and the performing goes hand in hand with the activism, that and it can be the activism. So like you say, it could be that I'm writing an article. It could be that I'm designing a performance piece for myself. That is when I say performing. It could be that somebody else has asked me to be included in a performance or consult about a performance. But I also do a little bit of freelance work. So I'm just working on my website at the minute, which is going to be called Neuro-Coach, which I'm hoping to launch soon. And basically, my goal with that is that people approach me who work in the creative industry and gain my insights and knowledge as a disabled queer person. It might be that they ask me to do a public talk. It might be that they ask me to come in and do a little training event. That is bespoke really according to what it needs. So what it's looked like for the past year is I've done public speaking about my own experiences, living with mental health, being a queer person. That's something I'm really interested in. So I spoke about that. I've wrote a few articles. I write for the local newspaper. And then currently I'm working on a mental health zine with a project that I'm involved with. So that's kind of my day to day is meetings, responding to social media messages, going out talking to people, going to different proactive groups where changes can be made, where policies and processes and things are changing for real life people.
So I guess income wise, it's a mix of various different things. And then you've got some kind of business to business, like freelance kind of work. Then you've got maybe some funded work in there, like pieces that you might look for funding for. So yeah, it's very much a modern kind of internet kind of job, is it?
It's something I've been building towards because we'll get into this more about sort of the disability side of it, but there became a point in my life where I realized I'm not going to be able to hold down like a traditional sort of 9 to 5 working job because I used to be a carer. So it was originally because of that. And because I learned, oh, we have this amazing resource, the internet, like you say, and it was just getting into like the gig economy and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, I can get down with this. And then it started with that. And I started messing about with setting up websites, thinking about freelance.
Mhm.
And I got into life coaching and sort of coaching people online. So I've learned about it through that. And then it's evolved into a bit of where it is now. But all the things you said are where I'm at. So it could be I'm collaborating with another artist and saying, hey, could you and I do some inclusive workshops? And because that I didn't mention, but I do like actual practical art workshops where I go in to already established groups and say, let's just do a little reflective art workshop that's accessible for all people.
Mhm.
And that means different things to different people.
Mhm.
And then because I don't have like my own company, which I've had in the past,
Mhm.
what we'll do is we will organize, for example, I collaborated with an artist during lockdown, and what she did was set up a community interest company. And then we were successfully securing £10,000 through the national lottery to then run the project we did for that. So it could be a big project like that. And I suddenly have quite a little, quite a nice little bit of income coming in. Still not very much, because I'm still only freelance. I am disabled. I'm not looking to work in the capacity some people might want to. So the income side of it, I'm not completely invested in income generation in that sense, but it could be a big project like that. And then I've also got, obviously, like you say, one-to-one consultancy with people where that is more, I'd like to keep that going as like a steadier stream. And then I've got what I do, which is technically voluntary. I basically work voluntary, which I think is really important. I think a lot of people just think work needs to be paid work.
Mhm.
Um, but thankfully, the place where I volunteer and where people should volunteer, and this is my advice on volunteering, is make sure you are compensated in some way for your time and commitment. And I am well compensated. I'm well looked after by the people that I volunteer for. And I think that is something I would put caution to with people, because I have volunteered a lot in the past. And as a disabled person, you can give a lot of time and energy to projects and
Mhm.
ventures. People need your voice, and realize that actually, you're wearing yourself thin
Mhm.
and you're not actually being compensated. But they do really lovely things like have little social events where they'll put food and drinks on. They will give us little vouchers here and there. They will provide transport for me.
Mhm.
They make sure I'm accommodated for and well looked
Looking
after.
after people, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you get into it? I mean, does this I mean, if you wanna fold the COVID question into this, into the response, because I assume that was, you said you used to be a carer, like, I'm assuming these things kind of all joined together. So, yeah, like, how did you get into doing this then?
Yeah. So how it linked to sort of the COVID thing. So I was saying about the timing really. So prior to COVID, it's easier to I feel like we're living in a like pre and post COVID world, aren't
Absolutely.
we?
There
Like,
is that, it's like a complete division, isn't it? It's like
yeah,
there was the world then, and there's now, which looks a bit like then, but isn't.
I just like, and it, so the only thing is, I think I was quite prepared, is what I wanted to say, for the COVID happening,
Mhm.
pandemic. In From a work point of view, we're talking here, working hours podcast, because I had already got into that mindset. I'd already started working online. I was working digitally. I
Mhm.
was just doing something different to what I'm doing now, as more the coaching side, like I told you. So
Mhm.
I was already delivering one-to-one coaching with people and being paid for that. And I'd gone from having a little office in the city centre where I did that to then online. And I had clients abroad, mostly in America. It's really popular in America, who's coaching.
Mhm.
And so I was already doing that. And I already had my own little website for that at the time. And I'm hoping to sort of combine that back again with the neuro coach.
Mhm.
But I was doing that. And that came from a desire to not have a traditional job where I go into an office, or I was doing a lot of commuting, which I had been before. I used to work in the NHS previously in the health industry, and it's exhausting. It was just exhausting. And so I was like, what can I do that's home based, because I'm a carer and I can, do this practically. And I've done a lot of research about it, and I needed to make sure it earned enough income as well. And coaching can be quite lucrative. It's just very challenging. It's very challenging with coaching to obtain and retain clients, because coaching should ultimately, if you're doing coaching well, be short term.
Yeah.
6 to 12 sessions. So then obviously you have to find new coaches who want to be coached. And that's what would take up your time, is marketing yourself as a coach. So I soon quickly realized that. So that's only really lucrative if you've then got a supporting organization who can constantly refer coaches to you. So what happened in lockdown is I'd started going prior to lockdown. I'd started thinking back to what I did when I was young, and that was really creative. And I wasn't very well. I had mental health problems, and they deteriorated prior to lockdown. And I'd started using art as a way of recovery, which I think is really common. I think I'm speaking to people now, and a lot of people do this. It's common. And then I started asking questions of the arts organisations around me that were supporting me in my mental health journey, and saying, why am I finding that the arts, which I've always presumed to be accessible, is not as accessible as I thought? So I started creating art, and I had some art in an exhibition, and I said, come to the exhibit. And I said, I mentally can't do that. I can't get to the exhibit. And I thought, I'm not going to be the only person in this position that can't go to this event or can't go to this exhibit. And that's basically what led me to being an activist, because basically an activist is somebody that asks questions and challenges process and protocol and tries to get change. That's what you're doing, really, ultimately, isn't it? It's basically like a form of protesting, but without taking a group of people out with you on the street.
Yeah, it's also like a radical form of teaching as well, isn't it? It's kind of like,
Yeah.
I need to teach more than this classroom. I have to get out of this school and teach everyone.
Which takes you back to my original passion for liking to stand up in front of people, liking the thought of teaching people, not in a narcissistic, like, you will hear me kind of thing, but just like, I've got a message, I want to get it out there. So it's just took me a long time, really, I guess, to think, what is my message? Which my current message with Blue Glasses and my brand is using creativity to reduce ableism. And that's it in a nutshell. So we've already gone over this, but then I started writing, speaking about my experiences. This was my journey. I was recovering from mental health. And then I just started to get back into my passions. I started writing for the newspaper, started writing zines, blogs, started to build my confidence back, started to do a bit of acting again, mostly like short student films. Then I started volunteering for, wait for it, it gets wild now, you ready for this, Simon? The UK's only wrestling church.
Nice.
And that all filtered through. And basically, what happened for me in lockdown is it went from my mental health to using art, doing this wonderful art project that I told you about earlier, because we just embarked on that. We'd just done all the pre-work in Bradford, and we'd wrote our funding bid. We said we're going to deliver these amazing workshops for families. They were creative, reflective practice. So the pre-work was me going to festivals, doing the workshops, getting feedback, getting people to write out all the evaluation forms, etc. And then we submitted it all, and then boom, lockdown. So what happened is straight on Zoom, like we are today. And it was like, right, what can we do, artists, to my colleague, and say, what can we do? How can we get around it? And everything went online. So I ended up writing a full digital online creative arts teaching program, which took me about a year. And it's something I'd always wanted to do. That was another tick off my list. And the other artist I worked with, what she did is she then put together the art materials, and we posted them out to families during lockdown. And so what they had is a platform they could log in, and they could watch videos that I'd sent them, and videos of her creating the art in response to the videos that I'd sent them, which were like little coaching modules almost. So that's what we did in lockdown. And the wrestling church got paused. And so the in-life, in-person stuff came back after lockdown.
Mm.
But during the lockdown period, I was doing everything online. I was vlogging, I was blogging, I was doing videos, like live videos every day. I was
Mm.
going into all the arts organizations were online. So I was doing like, hey, let's have, an hour reflective practice, or let's think about how you can put your exhibition online instead of in person. And everybody's mindsets and attitudes towards creativity suddenly changed overnight. Suddenly every artist was working from home, and every artist couldn't have a physical space to put their art and had to go online. And I was like, oh, this is just wonderful, because this is what I've been talking about for years. What is accessible is getting it. Not saying just getting things online, but just like here now doing a podcast, isn't it? It's so accessible, so people that can hear. It's just great.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, it puzzles me constantly. This sort of, because when I started this, I was sort of like, okay, well, I'm offering people the chance to be on a podcast. That's kind of enough. That's like a nice thing to do. People will jump at that opportunity because most people can't be bothered to make their own podcasts. So if someone's making one and they can be on one, why wouldn't you? But yeah, most people don't want to. Most people don't want to speak either. And most people want to be in my. It's like, I wish I'd known all of this before I started this. So I'm going to jump onto social media. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm kind of assuming where you mentioned the mental health difficulty, that was either caused or exacerbated by lockdown and going into lockdown. So I'm imagining that you're quite sort of busy, active, want a lot of things going on at the same time. How did you deal with that, just to sort of being cut off socially, and then everything had to go online, and that's how you had to handle it?
I feel I was affected slightly less than other people because um
You were already
I'm
working from home and online,
already
and you're
working
kind of
from
used
home,
to.
and I was more isolated because of my mental health. So at that point, I
Mm.
was sort of semi-agoraphobic. Anyway, I had
Hmm.
struggled with agoraphobia. So I'd not been going out. So I was basically locking myself down anyway. I was basically
Mm.
in lockdown, if you see what I mean. So I had some coping strategies that other people would have had. So I feel like I was had quite a favorable experience. But on the flip side of that, unfortunately for me, I was directly impacted by COVID to such a point where it took my mobility then. The difference pre-COVID to post-COVID is I was mobile, like physically mobile. I was able
Mm.
to walk up and downstairs. So it suddenly uprooted my whole world because I had lived in the world of neurodivergent and mental illness and knew about that kind of disability, mental
Mm.
disability, hadn't had much exposure to living with a physical disability. So suddenly to be a person that I had to move
Mm.
because I couldn't use my stairs. I had to learn how to use a power chair, learn how to use mobility aids, you know, don't have proper use all the time of my arms and legs.
Mm.
It's just very strange. And I know lots of people with long COVID will understand what I'm saying.
Mm.
Uh, and so I had to, where I left off from where we were just talking about is basically I had to take sort of like, I'd got into the acting and performing and doing all these things online and not realizing, oh, I'm sat down while I'm doing them. I'm not out and about.
Yeah.
So then as we come out of lockdown, people are saying, hey, can you come do this now in person? Can you bring it back into the physical world? And I was going, actually, no, because I'm now disabled. So, I can't come, announce your wrestling, or I can't come, you know, deliver a live workshop in person that's 50 miles away. It was a bit surreal, really. So the difference for me is pre and post is I would have been, like you say, it stopped me. I would have been out in that world. I would have just gone straight
Mm.
back into art spaces and straight back into running physical workshops and doing very much physical things and people having those expectations of me. So obviously what I did was I just dovetailed it in with what I was already doing, the activism, and said, hey, now I'm physically disabled and let's put that into the mix and let me share those experiences of what it's like to me being physically disabled now too.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, it's a whole new set of coping strategies that you have to learn. And I mean, it happens to people all the time, and like your life changes constantly, but there are points where it changes significantly and so on. But Like, yeah, that is, it must have been quite hard to sort of settle into, like, I'm all of these things. I've got all of these labels that I'm kind of like, I've dealt with this. And then it's like, here, have another thing.
You just think it's never ending. It's like
Yeah.
some days are really bad where I just think, why me? Do you know? I just feel like it's some sort of wrong punishment. I'm just like, because it's like I'd always been sort of like really right on about like activism and stuff. And like I always had a passion about ableism anyhow. I've always had a passion for disabled people since I was a little child. When I was like, a little child, like 4 years old, one of my earliest memories is helping my uncle who's passed away now change his catheter bag because he was a wheelchair user. He was quadriplegic. You know what I mean? So it's
Mm,
just, it's always been part of my life. I've always been caring for or supported or around disabled people. There's
mm,
nothing new in my world. And to
mm,
some reason why I'm saying that, Simon, is some people, and so I have to say that, and I'm saying it almost for myself, is that I sometimes forget that some people have never actually met a disabled person. They may have done in the sense of maybe that person just never disclosed that
yeah,
they've
hidden
got,
disabilities and
yeah,
stuff.
a
Yeah.
hidden disability. But in terms of, because we're still not at a point where that's fully recognized and that's still a new concept, when it comes to then having a visible disability, which is what I have now, that was what was new from my personal experience. But there's some people who've never seen somebody, visibly with a visible disability. And it's interesting to see people's reaction to me. And so what's been that big adjustment for me is like, oh, this whole other world of ableism, like I'm now personally experiencing. So I might have seen my peers experiencing it or my relatives experiencing it,
Mm,
but now I'm experiencing it. And I'm like, it is a big adjustment. So you're dealing with two things. You're dealing with, I can't go back to who and how I was,
mm,
which is really tough, really, really tough because I have ADHD, I have loads of energy and I want to be out there physically using it. I was a
mm,
person that was like, at the gym 3 times a week or out dancing and, doing things. And there's my life now that can't include that. And then there was the other side of it, which is, why are people being so different and why are people like this? And this is a psychology I've not seen before,
mm,
or I've seen it but towards other people, and now I'm receiving it, and it's really not very nice. So I
mm,
want to start talking about that more.
mm. And it's, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but I'm thinking of the phrase "What fresh hell is this?" But it's like the sort of,
Yes, I love that. Yeah, it's so true though.
but it's the sort of, okay, it's a bunch of discrimination that I'm going to have to deal with, but it's like, but in new forms, in subtly new, different, cruel ways of
That's
like
it. It's
new
exactly
things
that.
of like, so it's just like the list of crap just gets
It's like
longer
you have a
basically.
torture list, innit? And it's like, oh, we'll just add a new form of torture to it. It's like, oh, well, that keeps me sprightly and awake. Thank you for that. You know what I mean? Like, like, well, I've just given up now. I just like, what, like you say, like, what's the new fresh? I'm just like, what is today going to bring? Who actually knows? And the good thing is that's the positive. I'm a bit more case around now. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Because I'm just like, oh, do you know what? We've had a pandemic. I've got disabled. Like, I'll joke with my friends, like, what's going to happen? I'm going to get more disabled. It's like, probably. I don't even say that now. Like, don't jinx myself. I don't know. It's just like, and it just has made me sort of think, like, it's made me thankful, appreciative of what I do have. It's definitely humbled me way more. And I wish more people could have this experience. I think being disabled is such a humbling experience. And I don't wish that people were disabled, but I wish people had an equivalent experience that could be as humbling. I think
mm,
even like, for example, I've had friends that have had injuries, just something like maybe even like a broken leg, that's put them out of action for a few weeks. And even they like, oh, I know what it's like going around on crutches. You know what I mean? Like, and you can just relate in that way. It's like just something that gives you that little bit of insight because I'm so thankful. Like my writing's been affected a lot because
mm,
I can't physically use my hands as much. So I was doing quite a bit of writing yesterday, getting ready for a performance, and I was putting my rider access together. And I was thinking, oh, my hands are really sore. They were like aching for like hours afterwards.
mm,
And that would have been something I would have just took for granted. And then on the flip side, I'm thinking, well, at least I can use my hands, and I'm not having to find another strategy to cope.
Mm.
But I am quite resilient. I've had to find all these little strategies like, oh, I can't open a can. I didn't know there was an electric can opener. Well, that's a miracle. You know what I mean? It's like, all these little sort of things in life and to answer your question, which I didn't answer, the positives on the social media is I knew how to use social media already,
Mm.
but I've made better use of it. So I've had just recently an amazing opportunity through LinkedIn. Somebody saw my profile at the university where I used to study. And it was such a triumph because they were like, oh, we see you work in LGBT activism. It's LGBT History Month. Can you please come on a meeting that we've got? Rather than it be podcasts like this, which would have been really great. It was a live meeting that they invited people to, like a closed meeting
Mm-hmm.
for the students there. Could you be on our panel for, and talk about your experience? So I'm like, wow, you've got to think like how groundbreaking that is, because when I was studying at university, being transgender was classed as a mental illness.
Mm.
When I was studying at school, we had Section 28 where we weren't allowed to talk about any of these things open like we are now. So then to suddenly be invited back to university just 5 or 6 years later after graduating and, postgraduate qualification say, hey, come and talk about it. I was like, we're making progress. Yay.
So I'm looking at the time. We're not going to get through everything in this. So what I want to do, have I just lost my point? Of course I have, idiot. What did I want to where was I going to go? Oh yeah, so I wanted to run this by you. So I might make this the last question depending on how it goes. But so I've just finished that new Naomi Klein book, the Doppelganger one. And it's very interesting, like the approach she's taken in it. But there's a bit towards the end where she's talking about climate and sort of her attitude towards climate activism and the way that she was thinking about it. And through the process of this book that she's written and various things, she was talking about how we should not so much the environmental movement should more think about the earth as being harmed, or like take a more view of like a disabled, caring, needs-based view rather than like we're killing the earth. And it's just a really interesting framing that she gives. I wish I could kind of explain it better. But yeah, I wanted to kind of ask you about climate and kind of throw that in there and get your kind of perspective on it. So if we manage to arrange another session, we'll finish off the other questions. But yeah, just on the kind of climate area, we've kind of touched on social media. Brexit, we don't really care about anyway, but so unless you want to bring it in, but again, we can do it on another recording.
No, I don't really want to say anything about that except for it makes me very sad.
Mm.
Well, this was the one that I didn't have anything written down for because I was just like, wow, that's such a big question. But I'm so glad that I've never heard of that book. And I'm so glad that you spoke about that. And I think I should read it, really. That sounds amazing. And maybe you can help me answer this question, but that's given me a bit of a springboard. I don't know if this is the sort of answer that people are looking for, but the first thing that springs to my mind is that I'm vegan. And that has quite an impact on climate change. And that is a choice that I made several years ago. And it was probably one of the wisest choices I've made. And isn't it interesting that I'm vegan and now also have physical and mental disabilities, So you're talking about that sort of model of where I've been either caring for people and trying to nurture people and being very sort of working in the health industries, really wanting to improve people and people's situation. And then I've ended up in a difficult situation, but I've also had that mindset of being a bit more mindful, making a positive change in my own life, which was to go vegan. Interestingly enough, I found out after I'd gone vegan, and I'm always pushed to emphasize that because people will say, oh, is that why you went vegan? But no, it is because I don't want to slaughter animals. But that is the simplest answer. But I did find out afterwards, interestingly enough, I am allergic to a lot of things and I did have a lot of health issues as a result of that. So it goes back to that nurturing thing again, doesn't it? It's something we don't know what we don't know, So I made a positive change and it had a positive impact, but it's that snowball impact, I had multiple positive impacts in my life. It actually helped me get rid of a condition called IBS. So,
Mhm.
I don't really need to deal with that when I'm already dealing with other things now. So
Mhm.
one decision we make it's like that butterfly effect, isn't it? Has
Mm.
another decision somewhere else. And I think that is an attitude that would help people in relation to climate change, is to recognize that what they are doing does impact people if it's not them directly, because people are ultimately quite selfish. It will impact other people. And I definitely have that sort of outlook.
So
You know,
I saw this YouTube video the other day. It was an archaeologist talking about this lake of bones. Um, and it's somewhere where they can't basically get in to study it. And it's, there's no control over it. So people are they wander up there and they move all the bones around. And basically with an archaeological site, the second you take it out of its context, you lose about 90% of the information that you need or something.
oh, wow.
There's a point to this. Why am I saying this? I can't remember. God, it's one of those mornings. I think I'm being distracted by the snow.
I am too. I just looked out the window and was like, how are the flakes that big? And it's like, and also, why is it? Yeah, so people won't know, but the listeners, like, probably the snow will have been and gone by the time you guys all hear this. But why is it that when you arrange a meeting like this to do a podcast or do something important, that snow happens? I've got to go to another meeting after this. And I'm thinking, am I going to be able to drive? Like, is this safe? It's
Mm,
like,
mm.
why does this only happen on these days? Why is it never the day where you're like, do you know what? This is just a pajama day where I'm not going. Never on those days it snows. But at the same time, it's so damn pretty. So, like, what can we do?
Yeah, yeah,
It is really pretty as well. So, yeah. But I,
yeah.
I, I found that interesting what you said, because I never conceived of that. Like, isn't it? I used to absolutely love history and
Mm,
archaeology. My aunt is actually a history teacher, and it was one of my favorite subjects. And I quite liked a bit of geography as well. And I was interested in science, and just not very academically skilled at those things, but I like them. I find them interesting.
mm,
I mean, people forget that health is a science. I do
mm,
find I'm that geek that will sit at home reading research papers. I am that weirdo, and
mm,
I'm proudly hold that badge. I don't mind saying that. But just that thought, what you said, that the bones are in the bottom of that lake, but if you take them out of the lake, you don't have the knowledge, is kind of like how I feel about my disability. Like, I could either dwell on it and say, oh, poor me. Like, I've literally had people, and sadly this is a common experience, come up to me and go, I'm glad I'm not disabled like you, I'd kill myself.
mm.
Now, as somebody living with mental health who has had suicide attempts, that's probably not the best thing to say, first of all, right? No. And second of all, like, I understand where they're coming from, but it's a bit like what you're saying about those bones being in that lake. Like, I wouldn't know of this lived experience if I didn't have this lived experience.
Mm.
So I'm thankful for it, because it's showing me things about the world. It is showing me that we need to have compassion, that we need to have caring, that things are not everlasting. The world, we have caused damage, and we need to repair it. But it's also showing me about collaboration, that it's everybody's responsibility, you
Mm.
know, to care for something. It's like climate change has to be collective, doesn't it? We have to come together on it. And things like what we're doing now, choosing to have an online conversation rather than going out and, me driving my car or whatever, things like
Mm.
even just small choices like that. But there's little things we can do that can obviously make an improvement. But going back to the bones, it's like I could sit and dwell on it and say, oh, well, I'd rather have never had a disability and poor me, and isn't my
Mm.
life terrible? Or I can do the bones thing and say, well, all my experiences in the bottom of that lake inside those bones, you could take them out and repair them all and make them undisabled. But then, is Noah still Noah?
Mm.
Because you'd have to take out of my brain all my lived experience and stop me being an activist, stop me doing all the things I love. So I can't choose, can I, between the two?
Yeah, true.
And it's kind
Uh,
of a bit like that, us living on the planet, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like, we need to live here, we need to survive here, we need to all live together. But, like, how do we successfully achieve that, really? I mean, some of the things I've read are just so worrying. Like, this is where I do feel quite strongly about I wouldn't say I'm a vegan activist, but just in myself about things like veganism, because just like a small thing, for example, you read, for example, the damage that's happening in the sea, like overfishing and things like that. And I just think, okay, can't we just eat a little bit less? Do you know what I mean? It's that to me, there's like simple equations, but it goes back to what I was saying earlier. It seems like a simple solution to me, but I know there's massive cultural shifts for people to get where they need to be, and big mental changes people would have to make. And have I made those quicker because I've been disabled? I think I have. I think it has made me a more compassionate person. I think I do look outwardly at other people and care about things more because I think, I've had to have compassion for myself, had to have compassion for others. And I meet a lot of uncompassionate people, a lot of impatient, intolerant, judgmental, ableist people on a daily basis. There's a bit of a trope, which is, and it affects disabled community, which is that if you're not working and you're not in a full-time paid job, you're lazy. This trope that somehow you're lazy in some way. And there's nothing in between. I've noticed this. It's either you're working full-time and you're earning an income, and like you say, you're going out and you're working hard and you're getting those snacks and you're getting those nice things to show off to other people, or you're lazy. And I'm like, okay, so that's not logical. So where's the in-between? And I started thinking there isn't. That is just the British culture, isn't it? You've got to work hard, and people are literally working themselves to the bone. And I've been
To
that
death.
person,
Yeah.
literally to death. I've been that person. I've worked myself into an illness. I was that person working 60 hours a week in the NHS, killing myself when after tax I was probably getting a little bit more than minimum wage, And I'm like, to help other people, to be altruistic. And it's like, now you stand back and you think, okay, so then we've created another problem because obviously other people are realizing that and say, well, I don't want to go work as a psychologist or as a therapist or as a health worker then. And then we haven't got the health workers we need then to do these assessments to help the people that have got. So we're in this constant like double jeopardy then, aren't we? Like going round and round. And so then I get frustrated because we've got problems that there's no solutions for, which is frustrating, isn't it? In that sense. But my original point was there's got to be something in between. You're not lazy if you're not working yourself to death. You're sensible. And there is other options. And we are now getting into a mindset. And I'm so grateful for this, where there's working from home. There is other types of working that are perceived to be work. I still think voluntary work still does not have the status it should have.
I agree.
Voluntary work, it has the word work on the end, but yet we're like, oh, you're volunteering, like it's some kind of second-rate thing. It's like, let's think about who are volunteering. People that are volunteering are usually full-time carers, disabled people, people with health needs, people who are, for whatever reason else, are not able to work in a traditional paid role. So they're actually then giving up their time, or people that are looking for paid work. So how could that be perceived as being, lazy? But we're creating these tropes, aren't we? We're just creating these divisions. And I think we do something similar with climate change. We kind of got someone else's problem. Burn the world. You know what I mean? It's like, but you're burning the world you're standing on. Do you know what I mean? Like,
And then you're like, well, I don't care. I want to burn it. Burn me. Burn everything.
It's like, oh, well, I'll worry about that once it's burned down.
Yeah. I worry about that once I've died of heat stroke.
Yeah. And when people are. It's not even a joke. People are actually doing it. I went to Australia and it was like the hottest day on the planet. And I was like, people are living in this, and literally on every street corner, they just have shops for cancer treatment. And I was like, wow, and I was scared, I was getting up, putting up on all my tan lotion. I was fearful for my health. And I found it very interesting that fear wasn't there. People just like, oh yeah, this is just taking that as the norm. And yeah.
So we're recording. So so we're just picking up here part 2 because Noah had to run away to another meeting. And then for various reasons, illness on both sides, actually, because I've had a bad back that I've been laid up with. So,
I know that man.
but yeah, so we're going to pick up here just on the last two questions. So I'm going to start us off with the UBI question. And I think we kind of touched a little bit on this last interview. But yeah, so if there was a universal basic income, how do you think that would affect your work? Would you still be working? Would you do something else? Would you work more, work less? How would it change things for you?
I mean, I'm currently in that unique position where, because I am disabled and there's not a sort of demand on me to work sort of traditional hours, in a sense, I kind of have that privilege. So I have, like, if you want to call it privilege of a basic income, I'm looked after by the state in that sense. And so my basic needs are met. And so me working is a choice. And I don't know if some people know this, but I looked into it a little bit more, like, after we spoke, because part of the Care Act for disabled people states that working and having the ability to be in, like, work, whether it's gainful employment or paid volunteer work, which is what I do, mostly volunteer work, is that it's good for, we all know this, for our mental well-being and sometimes your physical well-being as well, getting out and about.
And your
And
social skills, that's
yeah,
underappreciated. Like,
that's
if
so
you're not
true.
going and meeting people, your
Oh,
social
yeah.
skills start to drop off.
That actually I didn't consider. And obviously, a lot of people suffer with anxiety, and I suffer with anxiety. And that takes me back to a time where, just walking into a room with people wasn't possible for me. And how much time it took to get where I am today, where I'm back to what I call myself, where I can do that. It's still not easy, but I can do that. But it's still not a given that I can interact, that I have a voice, that I can say what I want to say. Like, we're speaking here today, there's just the two of us here. So I agree. And I think quite both your physical health and your mental health in terms of that kind of anxiety can decline very quickly, like you say, if you're not in paid employment. So I had a point in my life where I was basically housebound. And when that happens, I was shocked. Like, my physical health, like my muscles, just, it takes, like, I remember a medic saying to me, it takes like 3 or 4 months for muscle waste to start hitting in. And I was like genuinely shocked, I was like, wow, So just like little things like walk to the bus stop, to the train station, traveling around, the ordinary kind of thing you do in work, like popping out a lunch break to go get your lunch, all your little routines, all those little things, like your little social interaction, having to speak to the person in the sandwich shop, even if you have got my headset on and buried deep in an office somewhere, you take those for granted, don't you? So for that exact reason, Simon, in the Care Act, it says that a disabled person is entitled to work and earn an income because it is so important to their mental and physical well-being, irrespective of being on benefits. And I think that is such an important thing, because I think a lot of people kind of in the outside world kind of just have a perception that you're either disabled and you don't work and that's it, or that you don't have a disability and you do work, and it's just like black and white. And it isn't. It's much more nuanced, and it's much more of a grey area, isn't it? It's just more to that picture. So how that links to the universal income is, some of us who are in my type of position have already kind of got an experience of that. Like, we're already navigating either routes back into the world of work through access to work, thinking, how can I get back into work? What does employment look like for me? Does it need to be full-time? Does it need to be part-time? Do I need to do a few hours here or there? Which is like where I'm at. I'm like just exploring how I feel being in a group, speaking to people, having somebody above me that I ask questions and make decisions with, because it's difficult being managed when you've been independent and you've not been working, and then suddenly you've got peers to think about and people above you to consider and things like that. So just getting that feeling back of, what does a work environment feel like? And I think a lot of people that I've seen that have had illness or sickness or have been out of work due to disability or whatever, I've coached a lot of people back into employment, and when it's been unsuccessful, it's because they've gone straight back into the same role with very little support mechanisms, the same amount of hours, and then they've got burnout again. So I think the universal income will help with that, because there's the security of knowing, I think I said this last time, I've got my basic needs met,
Mm.
and I can then really sit down with my employer and think what's best for themselves, for the organization, and what do they need? What do I need as a person? And I can have the honest, truthful conversation. So I don't think those conversations happen now. That's what I've seen anyway, coaching people, is that they're not able to go to their employer and say fully exactly what they need, exactly what they want, exactly what would work for them. And obviously it's a compromise because they've still got to meet their employer's requirements.
Mm.
But those conversations can't happen. And I've seen it on both sides. I've employed people, I've been in that position of being the employer and being the manager myself. And, the policies, procedures, and not having that flexibility. So I think universal income, I hope, would open up these conversations and allow people. Obviously, there'll be some people say, much like the black and whiteness of it, oh, well, this person's on benefits, they're work shy, they never want to get into work. And if we're allowing people to be dependent on this income, they're not going to look for work. That's a personality trait, isn't it? If some people are not wanting to be in work, or they struggle to take instructions from an employer,
Yeah, but we also know that, like, you've got conditions where you've got neurodivergent people where we know that they have things where it's like, if you tell them to do something, they won't do it out of spite. Right? They just can't be told, sort of thing. And like, they have to kind of make their own decisions, come to it themselves. Ideally, it would give that flexibility that you're talking about. But I think employers like recruiters, we're very much stuck in these models of like how things should work, like how a job should be applied for, and then how something should be managed, and how you should work 9 to 5, and how it should be in an office or a factory. And then, because the change with being online from COVID, even though everybody's done it, there's still a huge amount of resistance and backlash to it, and people saying, no, everybody come back into the office. And the sort of accessibility benefits that were there from it. I know of disabled people who were able to get work or more work or access work because things were more online and so on.
Like
I
that's that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the other thing is like time. Why are so many jobs tied to this 35 hours a week? Does this role really need someone doing it 35 hours a week? How much of that week is, just answering emails or things that could be automated? But the thought is always that. And it's like, you could get a person, maybe they can't do 35 hours a week. Maybe they can give you 5, 10 really good hours of work. And maybe you don't need more than that, and you could pay someone a decent wage rather than paying someone a really low wage for 35 hours a week where they're doing, 20 hours work or 10,
There's so much I could say about this, because one part of my brain is thinking the history of where this has come from, this 35-hour working week, and this everybody needs to work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, 35 hours a week. And that's like the panacea. And that if people aren't doing that, they're somehow not working, and where's that come from? Who decided that such a long time ago? And why was that decided? And why are we still adhering to it now, like you say, so many years later? Because that is a historical thing, why that was decided, and it doesn't apply, like you say, in the modern world as it is now in the UK. So you kind of question that. And then my other part of my brain is thinking exactly what you've said, all place I've worked where so much time is wasted, where so many superfluous things, not just that could be automated, but just that. I think I mentioned to you before, when I used to work in the NHS, the protracted meetings used to have with so many people, like a whole team meeting that could go on for like a couple of hours.
Yeah.
And I just thought, I would look at the pay scale of the people in that room, some on the lowest pay scale, and then on like a consultant on the highest pay scale. I'm like, do we really need to have a consultant sat in this meeting for an hour? It's like the best use of that paid time, and it just wasn't, there was just so many other things they could be doing that time. So I think a lot of organizations, the bigger they get especially, struggle to think about that type of productivity. They very much based on individuals' productivity, don't know what that individual's doing and individual targets, rather than looking at the organizational dynamics and be like, okay, let's have a think here. Do we need like all our senior management in a meeting? And what is the actual cost of that? they're looking at how much that senior manager costs and how effective they are as an individual. And I think more needs to be thought about in relation to that. And then I could just go on about this for hours, but individuals' productivity then I find really interesting, because this is something I wanted to answer in your next question, but I'll just tap into it a little bit now is, as you said, being a neurodivergent person, when I work, when I am most alert and available is in the evening. And I actually put on my email signature, and somebody noticed it this week. I had a phone call with the secretary in the NHS, and they said, "Oh, we noticed on your email signature, it says, Noah, that you're neurodivergent, and please note for any errors." And it turned out that this person also had type C ADHD, like myself. And I also put underneath, I don't know if they noticed this, I work unsociable hours. You may get an email at an odd time. I might email somebody at midnight, and because we've got into this really stagnant work culture where we're set in this kind of 9 to 5, 8 till 6 kind of way of working, which isn't the case if you're in a healthcare setting where there's shifts and other things, so that's interesting in itself, isn't it? It applies to one area of work in an office, but absolutely not in a hospital. So I find that interesting in itself. Perfectly acceptable to email somebody in hospital or ring somebody at 1 a.m. You know what I mean? So that in itself is just an interesting point. But for people that are in that kind of 9 to 5 sort of mode, if you email them at midnight, it's bizarre for them to see an email coming at midnight. But it's the reactivity. They've got into this oh, I need to respond to an email immediately. That could be because of neurodivergence, or it just could be because that's their productivity, that if I don't do it now, and attend to it. But that puts then the person sending that in that bind, doesn't it? Of they dare not send it because it's out of the working hours. So it's who's in the right, who's in the wrong there? Is it the person wanting to deal with it, or is the person sending it? But what ultimately is the issue there is this culture, isn't it, of being in fixed working hours. And I think I may have touched on this last time, is that I've done coaching with coachees who are out of the UK, all across the world. And the one thing that I loved about that time is we didn't have this issue because there was transcontinental hours. It was, if you're speaking to somebody in Australia and they're 10 hours behind, I could be having a coaching session at 2 a.m., but they don't care that it's 8 o'clock for them, but it's 2 a.m. for me, And so that I absolutely loved, but it was a bit sad that I had to work with people, internationally, which I have done a few times, just for it to fit in with when I'm most alert. And I think, like you say, employers have a long way to go in considering when people are productive. I read some research, some psychology research that basically said that people's productivity sort of ebbs and flows. It's natural for somebody, to be productive for 20 minutes spurts. We know this, don't we? It's common knowledge now. We know a lot more about the human mind, our attentiveness and how things work. And it's absolutely absurd to me that somebody could imagine that somebody can be sat at a computer for 8 hours straight and be totally concentrating. And one of the arguments for remote working was, well, we don't know what they're doing. They might be just sat at home drinking cups of tea and watching Netflix. You have the equivalent of your wasting time on Netflix by sitting in a team meeting for 2 hours, or by somebody going in the lunchroom and spending an hour in there, or somebody going in to make a cup of coffee and spending 20 minutes chatting to their colleague. But we also know that 20 minutes face to face speaking to their colleague, they've probably problem solved more in that 20 minutes than they have done on phone calls or emails or writing reports for the last 2 hours. So it's how do we get that? What made that difference? Why did they have a more productive meeting on their walk to get their sandwich at lunchtime? Do you know what I mean? About a problem than they did sat at their desk. And it's because it's that active communication, isn't it? It's you've suddenly changed their environment and they can think differently. So we've got this concept that we have to, it's very much, I think, a British cultural thing that we have to observe people. It comes from school, doesn't it? Children have to sit still, this uniform regimented way at desks, and they can be observed. and we can keep an eye on them and make sure they're actually working and doing their job. You know, when we actually know what is so interesting, really, that doesn't even match with psychology, that the more somebody's watched, the more somebody's observed, the less productive they're likely to be because they're fully aware of that. So when you actually take all those factors out, you take the supervision out, left at home, they did some research and they found out that even though people were doing other things, that was because they were sort of resetting their brain. They'd go watch Netflix for half an hour, come back, because that's how our brains problem solve.
Yeah, because
You
that's how
know?
people work, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If
You
we've
know,
got a mental jam
yeah.
and we're stuck, we like go, like the first thing people said to me is, they say, what do I do now if I get burnout? What do I do if I'm stuck with a project? I say, take a break, go do something completely different. You know, go create something, go for a walk, you know, go have a dance, go do something. Usually it's have a physical element as well.
Yeah, get
And
the
then
blood moving.
yeah, that's what I used
Get
to do
more
with kids at
oxygen to the
school.
brain. Renew things. Get
I wish
blood
I wish
flowing.
people could actually see what you're physically doing now. Because like Simon's lifting his arms up to sort of like the height of his head and waving them about. But what's interesting is I did a stress reduction. I used to lecture in stress reduction at Bradford Uni. And that is actually what you just did then is actually what I would get the students to do. Right, very similar movement, lifting your arms up to your head and bringing them back down again and waving them, because I was giving them tools they could do sat at a desk. And it does move the blood flow. You know, people are bringing things like this out into the workplace now, like, you know, seat-based exercise and things, because it is so vital, you know, that it resets the brain. It's also a cognitive thing, not just a physical thing. And then I think a lot of people don't realize that, you know, so I would talk about mindfulness, but to be mindful, you need to get back in your body as well as your mind.
Yeah. I think some of it is we base a lot of things on assumptions, and we base a lot of those assumptions on imagery and things that we've seen. And I think like when you're saying about working different hours and different times and so on, it's the kind of information that should be in your email footer. Do you know what I mean? Along with everything else, it's like you put your neurodivergency in there and sort of a little explanation. We should all kind of do that, because I've had other conversations with other people where people who work online a lot, there's a lot of pressure because they're dealing with the whole world internationally. They feel a lot of pressure to work outside their normal hours and to work all hours, and people are kind of demanding, and it's like, well, I'm not working, I'm in bed at that time. Yeah, I think more and more of us are going to have to explain, okay, I'm based here, I work these hours, this is when I'm effective. So it doesn't always have to be 9 to 5. These are all half-finished thoughts, but this is kind of thing that I'm thinking of. But yeah, I think working for myself as well, I've had a lot of, and I'm still struggling with, you know, when's best to work? When am I actually productive? How do I motivate myself? How do I get myself to do various things? And it's not easy because you're not trained to be like that, are you? You're trained to, like you say, do what the teacher tells you to do, you know, go and get a job, go and get on a bus, go to work, come home, you know. And
Yeah, how do you self-motivate?
yeah,
That's what you're getting at. How do you motivate yourself? And humans are like carrot and stick, aren't they? You know, that's how we've been trained, isn't it? You
yeah,
know,
that's
like,
how yeah.
yeah. And so it's like, you know, if you do something right, you get a carrot. If you don't, you get a stick, which is not a healthy approach. But that's kind of like where you're at that's how you've been educated, and you come into a workplace and your carrot is your income, you know, well done. You get a salary at the end, you know. And now it's not enough for people, is it? Now people are starting to question that. They're like, hang on a minute, I'm doing all this for minimum wage. You know what I mean? Now people are questioning, what, I'm just getting a carrot? You know, like people are starting to like, well, actually, you know, my mental health, my physical, I'll be suffering for that carrot. But in terms of like self-motivation, that obviously then puts that doubt in your mind, doesn't it? You don't want to then motivate yourself. But there's another part to that, which is some people I'm very self-motivated when it comes to things that are of interest to me, you know, that I find personally interesting. And people tend to go into fields, don't they, that appeal to them personally. But I think what the universal basic income could do is allow people to explore what they are interested in genuinely, rather than shoehorning themselves into a job that they feel they have to do to meet their basic needs, which I think is the most important thing. Because when I've been coaching people, they've come to me from all different professions. And the one thing why I become a creative coach is because they all had creative elements. Like some could make music, some could make art, whatever their jam was. And what was interesting is I was like, why are they not following their passions? Why are none of them following their passions? Why is one an accountant and, one a massage therapist or whatever it was, and I was very interested by that. And it's the same I applied for myself. You asked me how I got to where I am, and I told you I've gone back to what my original passions were. And if you stick to your passions, you are self-motivated. You want to do that because it is of interest to you. And it's staggering to me that employers can't see why they have people in their organization who are genuinely probably not interested in what they do.
Mhm.
And they know that, don't they? When they're employing them, they know, despite the interview process, despite everybody going to, oh, I can't wait to do this job. I'm so excited for this opportunity. We all say the right thing, don't we? We all say that because we need that job. All say that,
Yeah.
oh, I'll be with this organization for the next decade. You're wonderful. Do you have any questions? Yes, I've read your organization. But we've all been there. We've all done that and we've all succeeded and got that job. And also you may even genuinely think that, but then when you get into it, it could be a different organization to what you thought. But you've got always that tension of organizational demands versus your personal motivation. So as a coach, I love to think what motivates the person. So what I've done is through coaching, done a sort of trade-off, say, well, if I can motivate you in your passions and your creative side, you're going to be happier, feel this, whatever, happiness is very difficult to measure, almost impossible because it's very centered, but you're going to feel better in yourself and therefore you're more willing to do the work. That doesn't mean you necessarily are following your passion. But I worked with somebody, for example, who had quite a high level job and it was really draining. They were getting to the point of burnout, but they were also a DJ who made music. So we focused on them making art, making music. And next thing they know, they left me because they got promoted in their job. This was somebody who was on the verge of walking out with burnout. And it's purely because they were happier in themselves. It was their mental well-being that had improved. Nothing had changed about the workplace, but they would come to me and be like, oh, my colleagues are so much nicer. My managers are so much nicer. I knew that couldn't be true. Something had changed within them. So it's what we bring to the workplace as well. And I just think so many senior managers, organizations don't realize that, and we're getting into the culture of investing in employees' well-being, aren't we? Let's invest in their well-being. But how are we actually going about that? It's more like take you out for a team meal every so often. That's not actually employee well-being. Employee well-being is when they are following their own passions and they're given that space and time to do that. And if your workplace doesn't give them time to express themselves creatively, and I use the word creative because people get afraid they mean artistic, but creative for somebody could be skateboarding, it could be running, it could be going to the gym, it could be going out and trying on new clothes, whatever it is for them. It's that something that makes them glow inside, that they enjoy doing, that makes them that person that they uniquely are. Another thing that happened this week is a friend of mine has been out of work for quite a while, and they work in graphic design and they were offered a new job and they were up against really experienced candidates. This is the south of England. And they said, the employer who employed them said, we're giving you this role. We'd love for you to come on board. You were up against some really experienced candidates who had a much greater portfolio than you, but it was something about your personality. And that is so common. That's happened to me so many times. I've been employed purely on my personality. Not to say that I didn't have credentials, but, there was something in, and we pick people because they have that spark. And then we put out that spark and then we complain about it. That spark is their well-being.
Well, I'm going to throw this question in while you're sort of in this area. Why do we, or in your view, why do we separate or think of creation and production as different? If you're producing something, you're creating it, obviously. And if you're creating something, you're usually producing something. Why do we see these things as different?
Absolutely. It baffles me just this. I think about this quite a lot. And I haven't come to any conclusion, but one of the things I noticed a long, long time ago is I studied a technique called solution focused. I don't know if you've heard of that. And it was like quite a buzzword at the time. And it's just like an approach. It's called the solution focused approach. And it was to help people solve problems. And they apply it in all sorts of different sectors and workplaces. And it's just like a strategy for talking about a problem it could be in a business, it could be in a charity. And then they say, oh, we're going to apply to it the solution focused approach. And then the managers do that.
Mhm.
And ultimately, all it was a creative process, just engaging people in a creative conversation, thinking about, how can we solve this problem? Let's get some thoughts together. And then if you put that with a bunch of what people classify as creative people, like a bunch of artists like myself, it's the same process.
Mhm.
I've seen it in a workplace. I've seen it in voluntary work. I've seen it with creatives. And this is what I love looking at is the difference of people. But the process is always the same, the creative
Mhm.
process of how people utilize their brain and their thoughts and
Mhm.
their ideas and bring them together.
Mhm.
But we seem determined, don't we, to separate that out.
Mm.
And so why I brought up social focused is that was a phrase that was given
Mm.
that felt more acceptable rather than saying, let's all get together and create a solution. Let's all get together and use our creative minds, which we all know we have,
Mhm.
to deal with a problem. We have to use these odd terms, don't we? Like
Mm.
solution focused or, it's very, I don't know what it would be. I'm trying to think what kind of terms now I can't bring them to mind that I've seen in organizations, management, but they'll have their own
Yeah, like
terms, won't they?
management speak. Well, and then it got it was very managerial consultant speaky for a while, and then it went really HR speak, as if, HR and management consultants joined forces to create an evil language of their own.
It's like basically what I was trying to say in a nutshell is I could find out what that speak is, the HR speak, the management speak,
Mm.
and I could translate it into their speak, couldn't I? I could say what I'm actually doing here, instead of saying it's creative process, is saying it's this, and you would find that more palpable. But when somebody sat there, okay, let's imagine somebody suit and a tie, senior manager, and they've got this sort of, business outlook, and you was somebody like me come along as an artist and said, let's think creatively about this. They would see that as potentially a waste of time,
Mm.
waste of energy, a waste of money. What can creativity offer? But what we're actually finding out now is that all the research, all the psychology research, all the research around neurodiversity, look at Apple as prime example. Apple specifically goes out and employs neurodivergent people. They actually headhunt them.
Mm.
They have absolutely Google, Apple, all these big organizations go out and headhunt neurodivergent people and have workplaces that are so diverse and the setup of the actual environment is so diverse, to foster creativity and thinking of ideas, because them ideas become money,
Mm.
at the end. So I don't know why it is that we don't link creativity to productivity to profit. We don't link those three things. We kind of go, there's productivity and then there's profit. And it's like we just ignored it with, like you're saying, the creative process. And it's like somebody is not productive unless they're creative. And the link for me is there's two types of creativity. There's one that you're doing with your mind to solve a problem. And that could look very logical.
Mm.
That could look very practical. It could look very scientific. Some people tell me that science isn't creative. And I'm like, it's very creative.
Mm.
I disagree with that. But the other part that I was talking about earlier is the expression, the personal expression. So what do you do if, for example, I have had this experience I've been lots of time where I have come up with the best solution to something, but the person in front of me can't hear that. I
Mm.
can't express that solution because it doesn't fit in their model, their
Yeah, it's not
business
what they're
model and their way of
expecting.
thinking.
Yeah.
They're just not open to hearing it. So they shut you down. You're that person in that meeting who's got that great idea and you get shut down, or you're not in the right position in that organization. You're a junior member or whatever your
Mm.
scenario. But either way, you've got to create a solution and you get closed down. So what that does for your self-esteem, well-being is all of that. But also they've lost out.
Mm.
That organization has lost out massively, haven't they? Because they haven't been able to hear that person. And ironically, they won't recognize that because,
Yeah.
we feel we've just spoon
Or
feed
they'll
people.
fall ass backwards into it later and then go, oh, this is brilliant. And like, we thought of it ourselves kind of. It's like, no.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that always happens. But I think you've got two kinds of thinking. I find quite interesting. You've got the micro thinking, macro thinking. Looking at the smaller picture, then looking at the bigger picture,
Mm.
how the two fit together. And when we start to understand how people's mind works, it's like creativity. What it does is it takes you from that smaller micro picture of we've got this problem to let's look at everything around it. Let's look at the macro picture and where does it fit?
Mm.
Where does that problem fit in this system? And when we look at that bigger picture, we're expanding our minds. We're thinking creatively about the problem. Everybody's thoughts are coming into that. We quickly, or should do quickly. I can't say the word. I want to say quicker. We can't
Yep.
get the word, don't we? We more quickly get to that solution, right? Because we've taken into account everything around it. Whereas if one person sat there in isolation just looking at the problem and they haven't got other minds on it thinking with them. So sometimes the creative process happens collectively with other people. Sometimes it happens independently. But I think why that person gets shut down is people can't imagine that somebody can do that macro thinking in their own mind.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? They think
Yeah.
they need other people there. And I feel that we've become, sadly, in a lot of workplaces, too dependent. It's like, oh, I don't believe that you could create that idea in your own mind or think of that. Oh, you could only do that with me or the
Yeah.
support of your manager or other people around you. Therefore, I'm just going to dismiss it.
Yeah.
We don't hear it out.
Yeah. It's like, we'll say we want out of the box thinking a lot, but then we won't think out of the box. And then anyone that does, we won't listen to.
Well, I always say, and I've got some really wonderful clients. People look on my website, they'll see who my clients are, and they're very special people at York Creatives. And I do think we just say there isn't a box. What box? We just say that,
Yeah.
But I do understand what you're saying, which is interesting. For people who are working in a box environment, when somebody thinks out of the box, this is exactly what we're getting at, then it's like, get back in the box and we'll come to you when we're ready, because you're not in a position where you're allowed to think outside the box yet. Do you know what I mean? So I was like, you're waiting for permission.
Mm-hmm.
So I was always that person to speak up in meetings and it's like, okay, yeah, tap on the head, we'll get back to you later. And then, like you say, 6 months down the line, it would all go belly up and they'd be like, oh, actually, that idea that Noah had was spot on. But it's like, well, said that 6 months ago. But so I just used to have to watch the car crash happen,
Yeah.
and just sort of chuckle to myself,
Yeah.
But it's not fun when you're then having to undo all those problems, is it?
No. And when you see it in the first place, and you're just like, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
I've literally told you what's going to happen if you do this, and you're still doing it in front of me.
This is why what I do now. So as you know, I work in LGBT Minds, part of Leeds Mental Wellbeing Service, and our project is called a co-production project. And this
Mhm.
is the way forward for me, Simon. This is why it's so important, because co-production means a communication, a meeting of minds between organizations that might work like this and the real people who receive that service, the people on the ground like me. So I'm the person with mental health who's been through your service. You are the service. Let's talk. What works well, what doesn't. And it is literally like two people who speak a different language trying to talk. And it is hard having that communication. But the co-production side of it is that creative process. It's difficult and it's challenging because we're essentially like the out of the boxes, aren't we? Talking to the people in the box. And they would avoid that, wouldn't they? In their work sphere, they could say dismiss those voices, but suddenly we're this loud voice right in front of them because we're the people who they're providing the service to. So I think there needs to be a lot more of that co-production where people with actual lived experience of your organization are giving a direct input into how your organization runs.
Yeah. Why do you need to bring in somebody at, thousands of pounds an hour or a month or whatever rate to ask your staff what they think about their job. Go ask them. Go ask them yourself. So I'm going to move on to the change question. And this is for your own work. If there are any 3 things that you could change about your work, so you can make them fantastic, or you can be very like brutal and pragmatic. You don't have to use all 3, but if there were any 3 things that you could change about your work, what would you change?
So it's interesting because when you first asked me this question, I had an answer to it. And then I was listening to another podcast the other day, and it had a person on that was talking about being in work with ADHD. What they were saying on the podcast really resonated with me. And then I've just looked at my response and I was like, that is basically the same thing that person said. So there's obviously like a little bit of a theme going on there, which is, it does link to everything we've just been speaking about, which what I would change, which this isn't my work. So I hope you don't mind me like throwing this in there but it does affect what I do, which is organizational policies and practices.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of link to what we've just been saying. So I'm the sort of person that, might maybe struggle to follow a policy or a practice sometimes because of my disability. However, like we were saying earlier, you could have a neurodivergent person that you could tell many times, but they have to learn how to do that work in their own way. I could probably be classified as that person. However, I also would be the type of person, and this is what I mean about co-production. Part of the role of co-production is to say, why are those policies and processes in place? Then challenge it a little bit. Because we're so used to this stock response. Well, we can't change this work environment or the way we work because our policy is, but when are they refreshed? When are they changed? Like the amount of organizations that I've worked for or are now working with to change those policies and processes because they're not working. They're not working for them who are working in that organization as employees, and they're not working for the people whose needs are trying to meet.
Yeah.
And what is wrong with that? What is wrong with trying to change something or make something better? Why are we so afraid of change? So the one thing that I would like to change is to get people comfortable with change.
Yeah.
Sure.
And with justifying authority, like there's this sort of authority is assumed and you should just respect it. And it's kind of like, but why? Why is that?
Why?
And why is that trouble causing to ask that question? Like, can't I just understand why you've put this here, what its purpose is, and when it was there? And is it still fulfilling that? Is this useful? Because I'm not sure it is. And it's like, no, you must never ask the question.
When you were saying earlier about like consultants coming in, obviously I do consultation for different projects. And so I am all for that. But when you were talking about sort of somebody who's more of an expert in the area coming in to consult with an organization, and I am pro that. But like you say, you are paying somebody to do a service to come in and consult. And ultimately they're kind of then allowed, aren't they? They're given permission to go, why is that there? And does that still serve a purpose? Because you're paying them and they're a legitimate consultant. But as you say, but then this is what is curious about that. As you say, they wouldn't ask their own employers to find that solution. Yet they are employed because they seem to be capable and able to do that role to some extent.
They are doing.
Yeah.
They must be.
And you're measuring that progress. You're doing supervision. You're giving them targets. They're meeting all those. So they're competent people, confident humans who are excelling in their job, but you haven't thought to say, what do you think about that there? Is this still working? Instead, we've got to hire an external consultant, like you say, rather than ask their own staff. So that's why I'm really in love with this notion of co-production, because co-production is everybody working together, coaching one another, saying, is that right? Should that be here? What do we think? What do you think? And coming together with a solution moving forward. So you are asking your employer, you are asking that person, so it gets rid of what I found that people struggle with co-production, and it doesn't surprise me at all, is it kind of doesn't get rid of it. I can't say that, but it challenges the notion of hierarchy. And in the UK, I think I said this in another question, we're very hierarchical, outlook toward work and employment. And we have, senior managers and then supervisors. And then, I do feel that there is still that culture of we can't ask a more junior member of staff about an issue. And whenever I've been, no matter what age I was, age isn't relevant to being junior, is it? But whenever I've been in a junior position in my life, I've still not had, like you say, any authority. I've not been given that responsibility. I've not been asked those questions. I've not been in those decision-making meetings.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, like how much of your life in this country do you have to, unless you get into a position, do you have to spend being treated as like not a grown up? Because it's like, yeah, like you say, junior, and you're kind of, however old, I've been doing whatever for however long. It's like,
You're adult
surely I know
enough.
some stuff by now.
You're adult enough to do the job, but not adult enough to be asked the question about the job.
Yeah,
It's
to have an opinion
absurd.
about it. Yeah.
Absurd. And so you're being infantilized out. You're being kept in that
Yep.
small role, and that is a disservice to the employer, because whatever they're putting you in that infantilized state, that is reducing your productivity. That's reducing your well-being. That's diminishing your relationship with them. It's damaging it, because it's how they perceive you then as the employer, that you don't value them, and ultimately they're going to lose morale. They're going to lose motivation. They're probably going to leave. And yet they're in a junior position and they're going, well, I don't know why people aren't moving up through the ranks. This is why, the people that are staying there is probably through their own self-motivation. They probably just decided. How many people have you met who are in a more junior role that go, I want to be in a senior role before I leave this organization? It's their own self-motivation. They want to do that for themselves. It's not because of like the work environment. Like when I was younger, very, very, very young, like very early teens now, I worked in a hairdresser. So I was what they call the younger ones in hairdresser a junior. That's actually their name, right? And I was like not even a junior stylist, just like basically glorified tea person, make people cups of tea and wash their hair. That's all you do. That's how you start. And that's your rite of passage. And I remember the owners of the salon would get together and they would say, we're going to have a meeting about you juniors. That's what they would say. And it was to decide like what they were going to do with us and what I was going to like. And I was like, no junior in that meeting. And it's like, so as juniors, you might come and say, for example, I don't know, we're really busy on a Wednesday and there's not enough juniors on shift, or the dishwasher's broke, and it's a real problem because we can't make all the teas or whatever. Real, live issues. And they're like, right, we'll go have a meeting about you juniors. It's like, well, without us. Now I see, good salons where they have a team meeting and everybody's been included, and they'll ask all the staff what they think, which will include the juniors. But I always found that a complete madness. And that's how I sort of see it. It's like those two models, like, know. But then I have to admit, though, I've seen it work the other way, where you've got everybody in a decision-making meeting that perhaps don't need to be there. Like I was saying with the NHS, we've got everyone, So everybody's voice may need to be heard, but we don't need to have everybody present. And that's just something people haven't got their head around yet, isn't it? Like you don't have to have 15 people in a room to make a decision, but that's the kind of thing. But going back to the policy and procedures, that's what I would like to see a change in, is people being more open to systems changing, people evolving and changing, people's attitudes evolving and changing. Obviously, I would love, my second thing is, absolutely, I've got to say this, of course, and I would love to see workplaces becoming more safer, tolerant places for minorities, especially for people of different ethnicities, different religions, people in the LGBT plus community like myself. And that's what I do. That's what I'm passionate about. I want to see that change, because a lot of workplaces are trying, but they're still, you said about assumptions earlier, access on not being more accessible. When I say minorities and called disability and thinking about that intersectionality, but I say in my training, assumptions make an ass out of me and you. And so I've had my gender assumed, I've had my sexuality assumed, I've had my disability assumed. It's like, stop assuming. Let's just see a human being come in and just work with that human being. And there is just sort of, I don't know what it is about work culture, a need to label people, isn't there? We give them these silly titles, like say, I was called a junior when I work in a hairdresser. You know what I mean? Along the job title, something about giving somebody a job title and a definition, we then have to keep defining them.
Yeah. It's kind of like, what kind of ball bearing are you? How do you make the machine run? What's the name of you as a cog?
Yeah. Yeah. it takes me back, like you said, to factory days, doesn't it? And it's like, it's the boy who turns wheel 7. You know what I mean? Like, it didn't even have a name, did it? It was just like that boy who turned wheel 7,
Mm.
It's kind of like that. But now we've kind of gone the other way. It's like, you're not the boy who turned wheel 7. It's like, now we want to know everything about that boy, don't we? Like, you know what I mean?
Mm.
Well, is that boy married? What's their sexuality? Are they disabled? And we've kind of gone the kind of the other way now, haven't we? It's become very intimate in workplaces, hasn't it? I find people are struggling with their personal boundaries, and that's where it comes to your working life.
It's really confusing now because, because everyone's always pulled in all directions at once. So there's a sort of like, champion your identity, be loud and proud. And then there's also like, well, it's kind of none of your business, leave me alone. And I don't want to hear about it. And I don't want to learn new things, and I don't want this. And it's kind of like, yeah, really, I think most of us, lots of
Be
society, just like
visible,
to
but don't be visible.
put our headphones on and ignore everything. And
Yeah.
sorry, what were you saying? Be visible and
not be visible.
yeah.
You know what I mean? It's
Tell
like
everyone
all
everything about you,
mixed
but also, keep everything quiet.
but don't tell us too much because,
Yeah.
we might get overwhelmed. It's like, and we don't know what somebody else's overwhelm is. Does it? Like, for example, if, like you say, be out and be proud, it's like, so as a queer person, I might walk into a space, I'm just totally being myself and not feel that like I'm being out or being proud. But I could walk in there and they could just look at my clothes, look at my hair, look at the words I'm saying and feel totally overwhelmed and out of the depth. Feel like, what's this strange person coming in here? I wouldn't know that because I'm just being me. Do you understand what I mean? Or like with my ADHD and really talkative, and they could just be like completely overwhelmed. But then, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Like to know, but that's where I'm saying I'd just like to see workplaces just being a little bit more tolerant in that sense, like just rather than jump into that judgment, just let people be, rather than there be the gossip in the tea room about who that new person is or how that person is, just be a bit more just like, and a bit more faith in people. Like if somebody's been employed into that role or is working in that role, that the due diligence has been done, how many times have I heard people question people's ability to do their job? And I'm like, you're not their employer. You haven't placed them in that role. We step out of, how many people step out of their little roles to judge other people? And it's like, if we just kind of got on with what we should be getting on with, you know what I mean? It's just like, but why do we do this? This is the thing. Why do we behave like that?
Yeah. There's too much people being, policing other people's behavior. And that's kind of getting worse, as we've got more cameras watching more things. People are like, what are they doing? Why are they doing that? What's going on? It's like that question, why are they doing that? Well, that's the key question that you're not actually interested in. You're not interested in the why. You're just interested in that they're doing this thing and you've decided that it's bad or it is bad, but you don't know the reasons behind it.
So we have this problem. I know exactly what I mean. We have this problem with boundaries, and this is the thing now. We've got it to, working practices that come into people's homes, that are agile working, like you say, or, online. It's like the boundaries have become even more blurred. We've got social media, people can speak out. Like, when I was working like 25 years ago in an organization that did me wrong, I couldn't go on social media and rant about it. I could only tell my neighbors, like there's bigger consequences now, isn't there? For people whistleblowing, speaking out, or even the opposite, having positive experiences and sharing it. There's other avenues. And I think personal lives are becoming very enmeshed with work lives, and people are struggling and it's affecting their mental health to work out. And we spoke about the emails earlier and the email signature. So one thing I would like is for people to begin to respect each other's boundaries, like you said, without the question, well, why are they doing that? So if I want to work late at night and you don't, that's fine. There's room for us both in the world. I don't have to fit your little mold of what you perceive to be working to work successfully. And I think that's, and can we get to that place where, these three people over here can work in a way that works for them, and I can work over here in a way that works for me, and we're all valid. We're not less than anybody else. The amount of workplace I've worked in where it's like, well, they came in 10 minutes later than me, and they've done less work than me today, and they've just been sat around. Or, well, they were allowed, to leave an hour earlier last week to go pick up their little Tommy from school. I'm not allowed flexible working hours.
But where do we pick that up from? We don't, that's not something that's necessarily taught in school. I think that's something that you learn when you get into the workplace. That's something that's, within the work culture that you learn. Because it's never like, there's never really a cost calculation there, I don't think. It's
Nope.
not like, well, I'm getting paid the same as them, or they're getting paid more than me. So I'm not sure, what's your point here? Is your point that they should now be getting paid less and you should be getting paid more, which is a reasonable point. But how are you going to put that into practice?
I'll give a more
How are you going to explain that to your employer?
I'll give a more concrete example that's sort of phasing out as an issue now, but was a really big issue when I started smoking in the workplace.
Mm.
So back in the day when I used to work for a big insurance company, we had a lot of smokers, and we had a canteen downstairs and they could smoke in it. And so it became really contentious issue because they've been in the canteen smoking for the last 20 minutes. We've been upstairs working, and we were hitting our targets and they weren't because they were smoking. Then years later, when I went into the NHS, it was all the nurses have gone outside for a smoke because they moved from, obviously, we had the law which changed smoking indoors, but then it got to where you could smoke outside. And now I think a lot of the trusts have where you have to go out of a certain boundary.
Yeah.
So some of them, it's a bit odd because some of them, that means they're out of the boundary, is still out of the door. Some of them might have to walk, a few hundred yards off the site, which makes going for a smoke less appealing.
Yeah.
But then it became, well, the nurses have gone 200 yards down the road for smoke, come back. And we'd have people sat there in the office going, took them 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And they're like, I want to get paid. I'm working those 15 minutes. Why are they getting paid? If they're doing that 4 times a week, they're basically getting an hour off.
Yeah, but also their life expectancy is also being reduced. I'm saying that as a smoker.
And, nobody took into account the glaring obvious thing of that, or the glaring obvious thing that they're so stressed out in their occupation, they're having to go out 3 times a day for a cigarette. And actually do something that is they already know the working health is damaging their own health. It's that bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Nobody's taking that into account. And so what they did, which I thought was a really good solution, was they said, well, we're not stopping you from going for a walk for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
That might be good for your health. So everybody started walking at lunchtime and everybody started taking the 15 minutes, and it was a really great solution rather than penalize the smokers and say, well, that's it. You're on report because you need to stay in. It was well, they're doing that for the well-being. You do something equivalent. You go have a cup of tea for 15 minutes then, but this is how it can be successful. This is how you can work things in a successful way rather than be rigid and say, well, this group of people have to do this and this group of people have to do that. And I've seen other workplaces where it's well, you're all banned. Nobody can smoke for the next 7 hours,
It's restriction of privileges, isn't it? It's that whole military thinking of someone's done one thing, so we're going to punish the whole thing. We're going to take it off everybody. And instead it's privilege stops being privilege if you make it inclusive. If you expand it to more people, then it's not a privilege anymore, is it? It's a benefit for everyone.
That competitiveness that I've observed, where people, feel in a less than position and somebody's getting more than them somehow, it's unfair. We do like to challenge in Britain, don't we? Unfairness.
But then at the same time, we also celebrate if you are the beneficiary of that unfairness. It's not like anyone goes, oh no, that's unfair, I'll give it up. They're I've got something you haven't.
Exactly. So you can't both have something unfair and then taunt the fact that you've got something unfair. Yeah, exactly. But I think we've got very confused nowadays with equality. So you notice how I've said I'd like these things in the workplace, but I haven't treaded on the word equality yet, which is what I'm looking for. But people are very confused. People seem to equate equality with every person having the same.
Mm.
So when you said, where does that come from? That's where I think it comes from.
Mm.
I think we've been pushing diversity and equality for so many years and people don't know what it means.
Mm.
They don't know what we mean by diversity. They don't know what we mean by equality. And they take the words very literal and pragmatic sometimes. And for a lot of people, they see equality as I should get the same as the next person sat next to me. So if they go out for 15 minutes for a cigarette, I should get 15 minutes. But actually, equality is just about fairness. It's just about equitable,
Mm.
is this fair and equitable for everybody? So if Noah wants to go work, from 7 p.m. till 10 p.m., they're working 3 hours. That other person can work 3 hours, but Noah can do their 3 hours then. This other person can do their 3 hours then. But when a workplace tries and makes those adjustments and makes it fairer, that's when these problems arise that are interpersonal, don't they? People say, oh, well, why is that person left here? And why is Noah working at 7 o'clock and I have to come in at 8 o'clock? The tensions arise, don't they? So it'd be lovely to get to a place where things are fair and more equitable for everybody, but it's not seen as a negative and it is understood that it is a strive towards equality.
Mm. Okay. So I don't know if how many changes is that? Have we done one change there?
There was definitely
Have we done 3? We've done 2.
probably
Okay,
done 3 actually. Probably done 3. So my first one was policies and processes and workplaces being more open to change.
Mhm.
My second one was about people being more inclusive and more tolerant. So to minorities, so people with disabilities, people of different ethnicities and religions, people in the LGBT community, and not seeing it as like a big deal. Like you say, oh, we need to enact a diversity and inclusion policy, a queer person, what people do. Oh, what do we say? What do we do? Just getting it to a more ordinary point where, our workplace includes everyone and it's not going to freak us out. Do you know what I mean? And then the third one, I've forgotten. It was a third one, wasn't it? That we just touched on, but I forgot. But yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of freewheeling conversation. So we went in many different directions.
I'm sorry, this is just my brain.
I'm as bad. So yeah, so I mean, I think we've covered all my questions. So is there anything that you want to say or anything you want to discuss that we haven't touched on? If not, then where can people find you? What are your socials? What's coming up? Tell us about your podcast maybe and where people can find that. So yeah, so this is the bit where I hand it over to you to talk about whatever you want. But yeah, give us your socials if you can to start off.
Thank you. So this is great timing because I've finally finished my website, which I'd been working on last year. So you can find me at www.neuroqueer.online. And on there, there'll be links to my social media. So you can find my Instagram, my Facebook, my LinkedIn, and my X, as they now call it, don't they? Yeah. Which I find, do we all find that weird that we're all talking about our
Nobody's calling
exes?
it X. Nobody's calling it X.
Oh, I still call them big. Who wants to say, I was talking about my ex today? Nobody needs to say that sentence. So that nobody wants that
Well,
sentence in
Elon
their
Musk
daily
does.
life. Oh my gosh. No, I'm not even going to tell you what I think about Elon Musk. Let's just not go there, Elon Musk. So that's my website. All my links to my socials. What's new? I was in a podcast yesterday for Proud Change. They're an LGBT specific podcast that talks about different things. And that podcast was about why including LGBT plus people in mental health services is important and inclusion. And then podcast you were referring to is I'm a community reporter for an online newspaper called the Wesley's Dispatch. I've been reading that paper for 15 years and we do go to print maybe about 3 times a year. It's quite costly to print. Thankfully, we have a great sponsor, Sunnybank Mills in Farsley. If you've never been there, go. They've got great food. They've got an art gallery. It's a lovely spot to go to. They've got amateur brewery. There's loads of things down there. Go check it out.
Yeah, it's a great
old
spot.
Woolen. I love hanging out there. I actually got engaged there, so that was exciting. But yeah, they sponsor so that we can print and we leave them in various community spots across the community. We distribute them, including down at Sunnybank Mills. And what's on my website, a little bit about me, what I do, things I've already mentioned, consulting to creative arts industries about how to make their work practice more inclusive. So recently I was over in York with York Creatives with some students from York, St. John's, I think it's called, the university there,
Mhm.
and really interesting group of students, some doing the masters in theatre development, and just talking to them about what it's like being a disabled person trying to access the creative arts industry or creative activities. And what else do you need to know? Follow me on Instagram. It's on my links anyway, but I call myself Blue Glasses because I wear blue glasses on Instagram. So I haven't put on my website yet the links to the West Leeds Dispatch newspaper or the podcast. Podcast hasn't gone live yet. We recorded a few episodes and we will hopefully go live in May. So hopefully we will be on air then. And people can find that. They can just literally Google West Leeds Dispatch and it will come up.
Yeah,
They
it's
can
easy.
find that. But yeah, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. Maybe have a look at a project that I mentioned that I volunteer with. They have an Instagram, which is Leeds LGBT Minds, and they can have a look at what we do. We made a zine. That's what we did. I knew there was something I was forgetting. It's a mental health zine called Daisy Tray for anybody who's LGBT plus, and it's really lovely, Sarah. It's got like artwork in, little articles, stories, poems. So I submitted an article, some of my friends have submitted some poetry, and it's just a feel good sort of magazine. We didn't want to be all heavy duty, like, oh, this is your mental health, ring this number if in need of help and all doom and gloom. But there is some little key contacts in there as well, in case people pick it up. So there was a few printed, limited number of zines printed and given out specifically in the community, and we've done that. But now it's a QR code, so people can just pop online and read that digitally. So yeah, I'd love that if people would have a look at that and share that. That would be super.
I'll put the link in the show notes if you send it
That
to
would, yes, I will. that I'm very proud about because we took, I don't know, that was about 8 months of development to get that zine done. So I was like, and it does feel like an achievement. And now we've done one. We plan to produce them every quarter, so we feel like we've got that template down now. So it's going to be quite easy to do the next few. And I do think we're just constantly trying to find different ways to communicate with each other, aren't we, as humans? So zines, podcasts, websites, emails, social media. I mean, we just want to connect, don't we? We just want to be present human beings who connect with each other, whether it's face to face or virtually. And that's a wonderful thing. And just keep up the good work, everyone. Just keep connecting.
Yeah. And come on the show because it's not awful, is it? It's not a terrible experience.
I've been telling everyone, Simon, will listen. I'll be going around this week and I'll be like, I'm having to, you know what it's like when I'm the sort of person, you wouldn't believe this, but like, because you've been chatting to me, but when I'm out day to day, I'll chat to people, but I let them speak to me. It's like that therapist in me, if you see what I mean. So I'm not very forthcoming. So I won't be like, oh, I've done this or I've been on this. So I've been having to actively remind myself, mention the podcast because I have so enjoyed talking to you and this
Good.
experience. And we were saying, weren't we, how people are apprehensive to come on a podcast. And it's really just even coming on this has got me listening to more podcasts recently. So I'm very grateful for that. And I would just say to people, listen to podcasts. They are a great medium. Go on them yourself. Don't be shy. Don't be worried. You'll get the questions in advance. Take a little look and don't feel that, pressure and just enjoy the experience. But yeah, you've been great to talk to. You've opened up lots of ideas in my mind. And it's also got me thinking as well. I do a little blog on, didn't mention this, I'll link this at some point in my website, on Facebook called Spilltheequalitea, TEA, because I love going out to cafes and I'm doing a little blog spot about accessible cafes. So they might not be accessible, but, just talking about what the lighting's like, getting in and out, if they've got accessible toilets, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I started thinking from this podcast, some of the topics we've talked about would be really good blog posts. So that might be something I might do in the future for my website, is write a few blog spots with these topics that we've spoke about on the podcast. Yeah. So that's just another medium, isn't it? For people to, some people enjoy a little 2-minute read at work, don't they, as well?
Yeah. I mean, the other thing as well is like, you come on this and you literally are, I mean, no matter what kind of personality we are, we all do enjoy getting the ability to talk about ourselves and to have someone listen and to be interested. And how many times do you get that? Not as much as we'd like, And the whole point of this podcast is just come on, spend 2 hours just talking about yourself and what you do, and I'm going to listen, and hopefully that should just be an enjoyable experience.
A lot of
Yeah.
people are afraid when you say working. So I was interested in people's responses because I think, oh, you're going to like grill me about work, and what I do at work. And they want to tune out, don't they? Do you know what I mean? Because like, if they're a bit worried about thinking or talking about the work. But I explained to her, so this podcast you want to go on because we're talking, aren't we, broadly, as what we like at work, what we do. And I think there's a big difference when you say to somebody what you do and what you do for work. There's a lot of anxiety around the word work at the moment, isn't there? So I think that's a wonderful thing is you're breaking down that barrier with this podcast of just asking people like, what do you do? Let's get interested in what you do.
Yeah. Let's spend some serious time on it because you do. You spend most of your week on what you do. So, yeah. I'm going to stop the recording there. I have got another thing that I want to say to you, but I'm going to stop the recording because it might kick us off again. Thank you again to Noah for being my guest. Thanks, as always, to all my guests, and thanks to you, Leeds, for being my subject. You can find Noah's website at neurocoach.online, and you can follow their socials on Twitter at Blue Glasses UK, Facebook at Creative Coaching UK, and on Instagram at Blue Glasses. You can also find their work in the West Leeds Dispatch. Links to all of those will be in the show notes. If you'd like to contact me about working hours or any of my guests or their interviews or what the hell I'm on about at any particular moment or anything at all working hours related, even about being a guest, yes, you can do that if you're a lawyer. Then you can email me about the show at workinghourspod@western-studios.com. If you would like to buy Working Hours episodes outside of the main project, either as gift episodes for yourself or for others, you can do that, and you don't need to be based in Leeds for that. If you've been a guest already and you want to buy additional clips or content from your Working Hours episode or interview, then I'm obviously happy to let you do that. If you want to license Working Hours for anything, or if you really want some Working Hours merch, let me know. If you're an individual, a business, or an organisation based in West Yorkshire and you would like to sponsor or advertise on Working Hours, get in touch. It will be ridiculously cheap. If you want to contribute financially to Working Hours, you can make a donation of any amount or buy a membership subscription to support regularly. There's plenty of ways to do that, but the easiest way is via Ko-fi. That's ko-fi.com/working hours. If you would like to make a version of Working Hours for yourself about your own city, then also get in touch to discuss that and how we might boost each other's projects. If you are a business, an individual, or an organisation that is ready to take that next step and make your own podcast or audio content for your own audiences, then you can do that and support Working Hours by buying podcast services from me at Western Studios Leeds Limited. I've made podcasts for businesses, organisations and individuals, as well as the over 140 episodes of Working Hours, and I can give your show as much hands-on or hands-off support as you need. I can only take on so many shows though, so speak to me sooner rather than later about your show needs if you would like to work with me. To make your West Yorkshire podcast email, make my podcast at western-studios.com. Website and social links for Western Studios Leeds are in the credits. Commissions from outside of West Yorkshire will be considered, but it will cost a little more, just a smidge. Okay, that's me. Remember, listener, no matter what you do, it's impossible for you to understand anything that your salary depends on you not understanding. So work for peace and plan with kindness. Raise your voice and reduce your impact. Be big with your space and big with your dreams. Cheers, ears. Take care out there. And be kind to each other, Leeds. Working Hours is produced, recorded, edited and published by Simon Treen for Western Studios Leeds Limited. The music was The Bees from Chopin's Etudes. which is in the public domain and was taken from museopen.org. Go to western-studios.com and use the contact page on the site to drop me a message about either working hours or about your own Leeds podcast project. Keep up to date with working hours and find out about the other great Leeds podcasts that Western Studios is involved with by following Western Studios Leeds on Facebook at facebook.com/western_studios_Leeds and on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/company/Western-Studios. Western Studios Leeds is available to loaners to help them realise their own podcast projects for only £30 for an hour of audio podcast work or £40 for an hour of video podcast work. Email makemypodcast at western-studios.com with details of your project and what support you want to get your Leeds podcast made. Whatever your podcast question or need, get in touch with Western Studios Leeds.